What's up, party people? This is Chris DeRose. Today, we're doing things a little bit different. You might have noticed that over here, we have what's called an advertisement. Yes, that's right. It's an advertisement that we are featuring today. You can also see that I'm shilling it on the hat. Bill Fodl, the excellent Bill Fodl, run by Colin, a member of the Briar Patch in great standing. This is a physical wallet, survives fire and a whole bunch of other stuff. You can hold it in your hand. You can throw it at somebody if you don't like them. It's a very versatile Bitcoin wallet. I know what you're thinking, Chris. You're getting paid for ads now? No, I'm not. This is a product I believe in. I accepted no funds for this. Colin is just a cool guy with a cool product. And you know what? I'm trying out the ad format. I'm going to see what it's like. So really what this is probably cronyism, I had to be honest. But it's benevolent cronyism because it's cronyism I believe in. So guys, check out Bill Fodl. And now let's start the show. We've got Cathy Barrera on the show. Cathy, who are you and why should they know you?
Hi, thanks for having me. I am an economist. I work for Prysm Group. We are a blockchain economics and governance design firm. We help blockchain startups design their marketplaces and help them to achieve what the entrepreneur envisions people will do on their platform.
Okay, great. Yeah, so you were referred to me by Thomas Cox. Guys, if you haven't seen that interview, awesome interview. I hope and suspect that this will be equally wonderful. He told me that you were somebody I should speak to. You were a smarty pants and that you had something to teach us. And I suspect he's right. Now, I would like to talk about what the incentives are for blockchain, which seems to be a specialty that you possess. And it's something that I think is needed because so often in this space, people blockchain first and then perhaps incentivize second, only to find that maybe like what the disconnect was there perhaps, and it wasn't well thought out. So it seems to me that perhaps the incentive should come first, then you blockchain so that you can comport with perhaps a better plan at the start of a project. But that's my guess. I don't know if you agree. And maybe before we start with some of that kind of stuff, I think it's going to be very helpful to have an operational definition of what a blockchain is. So why don't you tell us what a blockchain is in your world?
Sure. So I think from my perspective as an economist, we probably use a slightly different definition than technical folks would use. What we want to know when we're thinking about blockchain technology, or basically any technology that an entrepreneur or new firm might be considering using, is why is that technology fundamentally different from a different option that entrepreneur might choose? So I think a couple of the most important features of blockchain are it's being a distributed network, being peer-to-peer, and being immutable. Those are some of the features that I would really highlight.
Okay, that's a fair enough value. Now, you took a technical approach to blockchain. Now, for me, I did that for many years where I felt like this was a technological innovation, but lately it seems more like a community goal, like a movement, like the blockchain, if you will, is itself. I mean, I want to not get into the realm of the spirit on this show, but like in some greater purpose than a traditional website. Like this notion of decentralization isn't one of consumption, but of interaction. Do you think that's a fair way to put it? Is that how you see it, or is that not even close to how you operate?
I actually think that it's both, right? So I think of a blockchain as being sort of a mini economy that's enabled by technology. Now, in an economy, what you have is a bunch of people or entities, say firms, that are all interacting with each other. So it's all individuals or groups making decisions and maybe competing, maybe cooperating with each other. What's interesting about blockchain is that you have this underlying technology or this software that's creating the rules for exactly how those interactions are going to unfold. So it has an influence on how people behave. The technology is sort of essential to that. But you're absolutely right. You can't discount the way people are behaving or the social aspect of blockchain.
Okay. So let's get onto the topic then at hand. And when someone comes to you, they need help. How do you start to articulate tokens and incentives and actors and roles, procedures? What's your strategy? what's the rubric you operate under?
Sure. So, so I'll go back to something you said a little bit earlier about which thing should you do first? Should you give incentives or should you blockchain first? I think that's actually super important in this industry, particularly if you are trying to create a truly decentralized platform. Then once you launch it, you no longer have the unilateral ability to make any changes. So it's really important that you set these things up correctly from the start. Also, because they are distributed systems, you don't have a say or you don't have control over what people are doing on the platform. So if you want to accomplish something particular, say you're creating a token curated registry and you want people to include great content, then you have to provide the incentives for them to do that. You can't sort of manage what those individuals are doing on the blockchain. So it's really important with a platform like that you set up in advance the correct incentives so that those users who eventually show up will fulfill the vision that you have for what this platform could do. Now, please interrupt me and ask questions if you have any. But what we do at Prysm is we like to build systems from the ground up. So incentives do not copy and paste well, and they're actually quite difficult to figure out. So we bring our expertise in economics. My PhD was in contract and incentive theory. My partner is an expert in market and mechanism design. So we bring our expertise from those areas in order to design systems from the ground up to accomplish exactly what it is that the entrepreneur who's asking for our help wants to occur.
Okay. So that's a good encompassing view of things. Now, it's interesting that you are pulling from contracts and incentive theory, you said?
Yeah.
What was the latter part? Yeah. So I feel like when the economists come to Bitcoin, usually what ends up happening is they say, none of this can work. None of this is going to work. None of this can work. And then like 9 years in, it's like still happening. And there's like this level of denial that people are like engaged in because the numbers didn't work out, yet it turns. So in your case, you're not coming at it, I think, from like a monetary policy standpoint.
No, not at all. Yeah.
You're coming on it in terms of like, I don't know, is it microeconomic theory, and is it behavioral economics?
Yeah, so my field of economics is a subfield of microeconomics. It's sort of overlaps with behavioral economics. They aren't the same, but there's a lot of areas of study that fall into the Venn diagram of those two categories. So exactly. A lot of microeconomics over the past several decades has been focused on how do we build systems, build institutions, build economies that will accomplish good results. So that to me is one of the reasons why blockchain is so fascinating, because essentially you have all of these entrepreneurs with fantastic ideas about how to build sort of mini economies or sort of self-enclosed economic systems.
Okay, so I want to present this in the right way because this is a constructive dialogue here, but it seems as if a lot of those specializations would be blockchain agnostic in the sense that it could just as easily apply to like World of Warcraft type stuff or online games or Call of Duty or something. And am I right about that? Is it that blockchain gives you a new expanse and enthusiasm with which to test these ideas? Or do you think that there is something fundamentally different in the realm of decentralization that doesn't apply to these other more conventional online worlds? And if there is a difference, what is it?
Okay, yeah. So we'll have to look at it at a couple different levels, right? So first of all, obviously, incentives exist outside of blockchain. They existed way before blockchain ever turned up. And people have been thinking about how to design incentives for a very long time. Think about CEO performance pay. Those are examples of incentives. So you're absolutely right. These are fields of economics that can apply to many contexts other than blockchain. I think that the comparison to video games is actually a super interesting comparison. You have someone set up a set of rules that are then going to govern how individuals interact in a game like World of Warcraft. So one thing that could be different about World of Warcraft versus well, certainly is different, I think, between World of Warcraft and like the Bitcoin blockchain, for example, is that there is no one controlling what the rules are on a day-to-day basis on the Bitcoin blockchain. So whereas World of Warcraft has an owner, has an authority that can come in and they could redesign the game, they could change what the rules are. With a distributed system like a blockchain, depending on exact, if you're looking at the protocol level, certainly no individual or single entity can come in and change the rules. And sometimes that could also be true at the app level.
Okay. So, like, candidly, where in your approach does like rhetoric get discussed? Because, like, I feel like in Bitcoin, it's going to piss people off. I'm just going to say it. To be clear, I love Bitcoin, love Bitcoin Core. But like, people come in and they come in under this rubric of decentralization, and then they show up and everything's decentralized. And then at some point they're like, wait a minute, a decision was made. Who made that decision? And then they look around and then they're like, oh, so-and-so made that decision. And then before you know it, like there's a level of rhetoric that exists for the newcomer that for the veteran, it's not that it's wrong. It's just that like the framing isn't as perhaps apt as it gets with experience. After you've been here for a while, you're like, who was that decision made? Who's the man behind the curtain? And like, lo and behold, like Luke Dash Jr. comes out and he's like, hi, I made that decision. And it doesn't mean it's not decentralized. It doesn't mean that that is centrally controlled. But with your projects and with your clients, is that a level of interface that you manage, like the internal dialogue and the external dialogue in terms of what the incentive structures are? Or is that not something that you engage in and you try to keep everybody on the same page?
So we really try to come in pre-launch and deliver to the entrepreneur the set of rules that we believe will accomplish what they're trying to do. Now, of course, once you sort of put something into action, you learn things, and you might update and want to change decisions that you've made. So depending on the context and how decentralized the system is, it might be a case where that entrepreneur then has the influence to be able to change those decisions later. Or it might be the case where they want to have that influence and they don't have as much of that influence as they would like to have. I guess there's sort of a couple parts to your question. I think it's really important when I talk about decentralization. What I highlight, having come from a background of contract theory, where property rights are the foundation of why people make the decisions they make, blockchain is different because no one owns the blockchain. In a traditional company, if a change is made, you know who has the decision rights to make that change, because the owner will always have any residual control rights. That's the definition of ownership. In a situation like blockchain, it's much more nuanced. So you can have these situations you're alluding to where maybe the decision control is only in the hands of a few people, but it's sort of unclear ex ante who exactly those people are going to be because there is no owner of this system. So in the context of our work, what we want to do is try to set up systems that are robust enough that they can sort of survive the impact of the real world, and people may be learning over time what the rules are and how to play by the rules. And hopefully enable systems like governance systems so that those rules can be changed over time in a fairly transparent and straightforward way.
Do you have I mean, there's this, the problem I have with microeconomics in blockchain, to the degree that I can comprehend it, is that it does seem like there are these, the elephant in the room is that there's like socioeconomic class that's involved in almost every blockchain, meaning like we have these individuals with great power, either as a result of their crypto holdings, meaning, they have an inordinate share of the pie. And if it's like a stake-based system, they have an inordinate share of representation in the system. Or they have an inordinate amount of like sweat equity and trust and social capital in the system. So I don't know that I always see an acknowledgement of that in the presentation of these assets to the public. And not that that's even dishonest. It usually just seems poorly considered. And just from my own experience in the space, that often causes problems. So do you want to talk a little bit about how that factors into your evaluation of these things? Does it? Am I just wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. And I would 100% agree with you that that these things don't seem to be very well considered. I think that most people in this space are still learning about the impact of having systems in place or not having systems in place, or sort of the different ways those systems could be designed in order to have an impact on the sort of power consolidation that you're talking about. So I think people care a lot about the outcomes, but they don't necessarily know how their policy decisions are going to impact those outcomes. And there's been a lot of experimentation around those policy decisions in order to try to come to better outcomes. My view is that a solid foundation in microeconomics, a solid understanding of how these forces and mechanisms tend to move behavior, will help us to, instead of guessing and checking, do a little bit more design and maybe get to better outcomes faster.
So how do you, in your estimation, do you design a blockchain governance strategy that it seems as if it ideally would accommodate sweat equity and sweat, skin in the game alongside capital interests? Because generally, in my experience, the people with the capital don't want to put much time into things, and the people without capital are fairly willing to shitpost all day if that's what it takes to make $5. And I don't know that is being well developed. Like, do you think that democracy alone works? And if so, how do you control for identity? Or do you do a democracy based on holdings? And can you get into any of the specifics on what governance you're seeing working or what you think will work?
Sure. Oh gosh, these are huge questions. So the first thing that I would say, I think it's super important to just take a step back and think about what is it that governance is supposed to do, right? What governance does is help us make decisions over time as we gather more information and as the environment around us changes. Governance is about decision making. So after we realize that, the next thing we need to ask ourselves is, what decisions? What are we deciding about? There's depending on what those decisions are, we might think that different groups should or should not be involved in the decision making. We might think for certain types of decisions, it's more important to have an open and democratic process. For other types of decision, expertise or experience are more important. So it's very difficult to say in a general abstract way, what are the best governance designs? You really need to narrow in on what are the decisions we need to make for this platform over time. And it might be that for different categories of decisions for a single platform, the process should be different.
So are you going for more of a corporate governance model then at the onset with the intent of handing it over to the community over time? Or do you try to get it exactly right off the bat in that sense?
My feeling is you need to create a set of rules that guide the decision-making process, right? So if you would like to hand it over to the community right away, they need to have the tools to be able to coordinate amongst themselves in order to make those sort of ongoing decisions. So I think that, again, and this is the economist in me, everything depends on context. There's trade-offs in any decision that you make. And so it's going to be highly dependent on what the platform is for and who is the community, why are they coming to participate in this platform. So say for things like large international monetary payments, if you have a blockchain for that, the governance system should probably look different than if you have something like a social media platform.
Sure. Well, okay. I like what EOS is doing because it's bold. It doesn't like the level of rhetoric that exists is fairly it seems to me like it's fairly transparent, and it seems as if there's an obvious path to accession in the system. If you want to get involved, you start at the bottom, and it's obvious how you get to the top. And I like that about the project. And it is a sharp deviation from what we've seen in Bitcoin, wherein like there was just like a sort of implied sort of like don't ask, don't tell policy about what the hell is happening. And if you want to get involved, you can code. And then there's I don't want to like cast aspersions on the process, because I actually do think it's fairly benevolent. But it's not totally above board to everybody how it is that they get involved, especially if you're not a coder. So I think what I'd like to ask is, what projects do you like in the space? What has been a model of success thus far? And what do you think is a good example for other projects to look and learn from?
In terms of governance specifically?
Yeah. And community management. Like the term, everything's framing. You come to some communities and you look at what's obviously a governance process and you call it that, and they kick you out of the room. And if you instead use the word community, all of a sudden it's okay. And you can have the exact same conversation, just plugging in different words. I don't know.
Yeah. I think that we have a long way to go on this topic. And I think eventually we're going to need to start thinking seriously about identity on the blockchain. At least things that can be interpreted by a protocol or a piece of software as being identification. So a big problem this is not something I've come up with. It's discussed a lot in blog posts about governance, is that it's very difficult to tell if one person is controlling multiple accounts, or if one person is controlling a lot of votes. And so I think that there are potential innovations around sort of algorithmic observance of how people or accounts are behaving on a blockchain, right? So really what you want is people who are invested in the platform, people who are participating in a positive way, to have a say in how things are done over time. And in theory, data analysis can help us understand which accounts are contributing in a positive way, which accounts are utilizing the platform frequently, and not in an aim to sort of game the system. Theoretically, something like an AI would be able to tell the difference between what is a real person and what is a fake account. And so I think and I hope that in time we'll be able to utilize that kind of data in order to award votes in a way that helps people who are actively using the platform and are positively contributing to it to have a larger say in how things are done over time.
AI is the ghost of the machine. I feel like you can it's like the god of the gaps. Like if there's a problem, you stick AI in there and hope, and then like maybe it'll mature, maybe it won't. I try not to do that, but it's an easy way to like kick the ball, down the field a little bit. The identity issue is huge, and like a lot of these things aren't new in society, because like I could hop the border and like be a new identity in a different country and go through the process. I don't know exactly how that works. I assume that that's something that I can do in some countries. Certainly that was what we could do in the past. Like American history is full of people that went west, like rebooting their identity every town along the way. But I don't know that algorithmically that's possible, and I'm a little skeptical that algorithmically that's possible. But it seems to me that you almost can't have like there's this sort of like normalization of function that needs to take place in blockchain, such that you can't expect any one company to provide identity management and credit assessment and on and on and on. And it seems to me like until we have macroeconomic blockchains within which microeconomic blockchain projects might take place, I'm butchering the words, I know this, that a lot of these things are at an impasse. Do you agree with that? Like, do you see that maybe, or do you believe that maybe a lot of these problems are bigger than any one project can handle, and that it would make sense to normalize that cost across like the system? And if so, what does that say for the industry? Is it that you need to have a sort of parent blockchain in order to be successful, do you think? Or Talk about that.
Sure. Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. So I think there are a myriad of challenges to being able to develop a distributed platform that will be sustainable in the long run. So certainly we have examples of blockchains that have been around 10 years. But is 10 years the long run? Is that sort of the lifespan that we hope for things that we're building now? I think we probably want them to last significantly longer than that, and we don't have direct evidence that that we're building things that are that sustainable. So I think a lot of experimentation is required, but I hope that we can bring some rigor to that process and can sort of, again, design these experiments in a way to get closer to optimal faster. And so I think, your question about how should the costs of that experimentation be borne, I think is a good question. I think so you have a distributed community of people with different ideas about how distributed platforms should be built. I think this makes coordination on potential solutions and on investment in the kind of experimentation that I was talking about quite difficult. I think that, and of course we discussed maybe we want to stay away from spirituality or ideology, but I think that there is quite a bit of a streak of independence among members of this community, members of this industry, if you want to call it that. And so, some of these challenges are even bigger and even harder to overcome because there is sort of less coordination on solutions than there might otherwise be.
Okay. How about this? Should we take the conversation more towards the macro or more towards the micro? I got like another 10 minutes with you, and I got any number of things we can discuss. What are you more comfortable with? Large scale assessments of the space or individual project considerations?
I could go either way, but let's go.
How about this? I'll give you two options. Option one: what are the problems with incumbent models of token economics? Or option two: is the internet declaring its independence?
Is the internet declaring its independence? I like that. Let's go with option two. Is the internet declaring its independence? I think it is, and I think for very good reason. So in my prior life, before blockchain, after I completed my PhD, I became a professor at the business school at Cornell. And my research was all about how new technologies are reshaping the economy. Very interested in the digital revolution, as everyone keeps calling it. And I think there's a variety of technologies that are driving us in that direction. The internet was one of them. Digital media is another. Things like 3D printing, autonomous driving, and AI. All of these seemingly disparate yet somehow interconnected technologies, I think, are all driving us in a particular direction. My view is that these technologies sort of are the opposite in character to technologies that were developed during the Industrial Revolution. So whereas the steam engine and the assembly line drove us toward mass scale, generic goods, etc., this new revolution seems to be driving us more toward small scale, artisanal, bespoke, peer-to-peer, all these sorts of more networked types of value creation. And so I think that the time is ripe for the internet to what did you say? For the
declare its independence.
For the internet to declare its independence, precisely because we are now able to leverage these other technologies And by sort of declaring independence or taking back some of the power in this network that connects us all and helps us to produce all of this value, then we can capture more of that value in that peer-to-peer network. It can go more towards individuals, towards people with new and different ideas, and maybe a little bit less towards those established institutions and centralized authorities.
Yeah, I'm watching. Like, I've seen this in my own life, and I never know when I'm being a weirdo or when I'm ahead of the curve, because it's indifferentiable in my life when those two options. You never really know with me. But like, I've always been more into my online communities than my offline communities. And like around me right now, you can't see it obviously. This is just a painting here. This is not what's actually behind me. It's a green screen. But there's like beach bums and like nice people and tourists and so on and so forth. But like, I don't really have much in common with them. Like, I have little small talk and they're wonderful and I enjoy those conversations. But when I want to have like a meaningful conversation with my kind, my people, I go online to do that. And I've noticed like over the years, my mom has started to do that. And my mom's a pretty cool mom, to be clear. But like, her friends are not necessarily people that she's grown up with. She's a traveler. She loves to travel. And she has all of these international relationships now. And the things that she has in common increasingly with this group are exceeding the things that she has in common offline with people. So then I wonder, maybe what's going on here with blockchain is that, like, are we forming these proto-nations and proto-governments of a sort online? And then if that's the case, how does that factor into what's happening here? Do you think that maybe that's a valid assessment? And what problems will that solve? Is it merely another stage of economics, or do you think that it's like a new configuration for international identity?
Oh, yes. So I would like to maybe draw a distinction between, I guess, between law and economics, or sort of legal jurisdictions and markets. I think that one of the great things is that these technologies are allowing us to connect with other people exactly who have similar ideas and preferences to what we have. And so we can generate more value, whether that value is in producing new goods or that value is in exchanging ideas. And so, those I think of as sort of being economic activity, and it doesn't necessarily matter whether or not money is changing hands. If you are gaining value from a relationship that you have with someone on the other side of the world, that's value added. So not everything gets measured in GDP, but these technologies are certainly contributing and increasing the quality of life for all kinds of people all around the world. I think that's a little bit different from thinking about these as maybe like borderless countries, or trying to think of how jurisdictions might be redrawn or undrawn. I think those are much, much more complicated questions, but that doesn't detract from right. So even if those borders are not redrawn, I think that doesn't detract from all of this value that's being created by connecting people all around the world.
Well, they're like demographic borders, I think, that are happening online more so than anything else. And like, even in these little silos that are games, like that seems to be what it is there's like this demographic interest. It's maybe the people who like first person shooting games, or the people that like strategy games, and then the people that like perhaps future land versus like old earth land or something like that. And obviously blockchain is none of those things, but I don't know, for me, what I see getting people mostly invested in these communities is like a sense of earning. And I don't know that I see that as much as I think we should be seeing that in these offerings. Do you have a comprehension of earning as a engagement or a faith acquisition effort in these communities? Is earning perhaps not something that you think about when you're designing a strategy?
So when you say earning, you mean something like token rewards? Is that? What do you have in mind?
Well, more so than that, like producing an outcome at a cost, at a sacrifice for a return. So like in some cases, like video games, I don't know that you really produce any outcome other than by way of simulation and challenge. But you might be in the case that you create like a sword or something that is like a decorative thing that other people would purchase from you because this was an object of great value. So like in my mind, yeah, that would be what earning is probably producing something for the community that that orders the chaos, that improves the efficiency, or otherwise decorates the environment. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you define those earnings very broadly, then I'm in 100% agreement with you. I think one of maybe problems, I'm not sure the right word to use for it, but over the course of the 20th century, we became very, very, very good at measuring some things while totally ignoring stuff that we can't measure. And I think that has directed our attention in certain directions that maybe isn't necessarily helpful in getting us where we want to go. So let me give you one example. We think a lot about GDP. I think I mentioned this before. So GDP is the best measure of economic productivity that we have, but it excludes a lot of stuff that would contribute to economic well-being. So GDP measures things that are traded, and it doesn't measure things that are not traded. So for example, if I go out to dinner at the Italian restaurant down the street and have a lasagna, that will contribute to GDP because I paid for it. If my neighbor makes me a lasagna, that will not contribute to GDP because I didn't pay for it. But in fact, if I have dinner with my neighbor, maybe that creates even more value than if I go to the restaurant down the street because I'm having the social interaction, we're building community. And so those are sort of things that can't get measured, that can't be observed in these numbers that we're looking at. And so one of my concerns about blockchain as we build these communities, as we build these platforms, is that we are going to get very focused on the things that we can measure, those rewards that are coming back in the form of tokens, say, and be less focused on the value that we're gaining that can't be captured in those measurements.
Well, okay, yeah. So like this, for me, I saw what the SEC just named, I don't know if they use the term crypto czar. I always thought it was a goofy ass name, but a crypto specialist or a crypto, what is the title here? What is this person's name? Did you see this? This was like 2 days ago.
I did briefly, yes.
Do you know what the title is and what the woman's name was?
The headline I saw also said crypto czar.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think people want that to be, I don't know that the SEC used that title. Like for me, I'm shocked that happened, because when this all happened, it was like, okay, Bitcoin showed up and we're gonna kick everybody out. It's gonna be the revolution and we're gonna reboot the system. And then that didn't happen, which is, pretty obvious in hindsight. But even still, rather than like curb that enthusiasm, it seems like the SEC wants to leverage that enthusiasm. And I'm like, okay, that's great, but what is it that you think that enthusiasm represents? Because in my mind, many, if not most of these offerings are just arbitraging securities law. And that's clearly, there's nothing new. The only thing new about blockchain in that respect is that it's a bearer instrument. And so it's kind of weird, because like I'm thinking, okay, did the SEC just appoint a czar of bearer instruments or a czar of decentralization? And if it's the latter, what does that risk represent to the US government's interest? Because it might be the stuff you're talking about that is not the GDP. I don't know. So,
right. So the mandate of the SEC is basically to protect investors, right? So I think that the big issue here is when we're doing crowdfunding in particular, money is being given by people who are not accredited investors, and therefore, according to the standards that we have previously applied, are considered to be people who, one, would be vulnerable to a loss of that money if that money was not returned, then that could be problematic for those populations. And two, they're not professional investors, so they may not have the level of sophistication required to really assess these investment opportunities, given the limited amount of information that is available. And so it's the SEC's domain to protect those individuals from snake oil salesmen, basically. And of course, given this new technology and that I'm not sure if the SEC agrees, I think that they do, given the steps that they're taking. But given that we agree that this technology shows a great deal of promise, we want projects that are pushing the technology forward to get funded. We just don't want that to happen in a context where some potential investors can be taken advantage of because such limited information is available about the projects that are asking for money. And so, yeah.
Yeah, but they decided that apparently it seems that they decided there's a new asset class that it seems is like bearer instruments 2.0. And I'm okay with that. That's cool. I think it's great, actually. But it seems as if they've decided that's a new kind of risk entirely. I mean, and it is, to its credit, it is completely decorrelated from the existing markets in every way that anyone can assess.
I'm not sure I entirely agree with you. I think what they're saying is that in the existing regime, if you wanted to sell to this set of investors, you would have to provide a stack of papers, thousands and thousands of pages of papers in order to be able to prove that this is a reasonable investment. Yes, there is some risk, but there's nothing fraudulent happening here. And so what I think they're saying here is, okay, we don't want to stop these retail investors from being able to put their money into these securities, but currently they aren't providing those thousands of pages of information. And so how can we somehow meet in the middle where we're still able to protect these investors, and we're not making such high demands of these really early stage technologies and startups regarding the kinds of information they have to provide in order to meet our standards?
Do you think it may be like a political football towards the interest of reversing some of the more onerous provisions of the Frank-Dodd Act? And like at some level, it's being massaged for like rhetoric in terms of like reducing regulatory compliance overhead on incumbent security models? Or do you think that's a little bit too out there, extrapolating too much, Chris?
Yeah, I wouldn't agree with that. I think that this is just one step in what will be a series of steps, but I think that the SEC is not sure yet which direction those steps need to go in. So they're taking one step and trying to look around and figure out, okay, where is the next footing so we can ensure that this technology is in fact allowed to move forward, that good projects do get the funding that they need, but that we have to raise the bar on what we're demanding of these startups in order to ensure that there isn't fraudulent activity.
All right. Well, Cathy, you've got a lot of polish. You've got a wonderful presentation. I very much enjoyed your expertise on the show. Where can people find out more about you?
You can find me on Twitter at Cathy Barrera, PhD. I'm also on Medium, also at Cathy Barrera, PhD.
Wonderful, Cathy. We'll cross paths again. This won't be the last time we interact. Maybe I'll get you back on the show, or I'll see you at a conference or something. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yep. Have a good day. She was very pleasant. Very nice lady. Let's see. And for the comments, fuck the SEC. Hooray, the SEC. It's so I don't know. My theory on what's going on. Oh, thank you, Tal. Man, you said much appreciated. I will give that to them. The thing about, for me, I'm shocked at what happened with the SEC. It's very, I don't know to the degree that they know what's going on. I don't know that they realize that the majority of the blockchain proposition has been that of the digital bearer instrument. And we've had digital registered instruments forever. And then Bitcoin came around. And for me, the innovation was primarily like in terms of like the technology behind Bitcoin back when that was actually like measured in computer science terms. It was this digital bearer asset thing that incidental to that technology. And there's a lot of stuff that went with it, but it was kind of like issued by a non-issuer. It was acausal. Like the acausal blockchain events are the best. I love acausal blockchain. It's acausal in the sense that like the developers wrote the thing, the miners mined the thing, and then this just happened and we don't know where it came from, but here it is and now you have it. And so like that solution was clever. And where liability may or may not be like expressed in that process is almost irrelevant, because at that point like you've arbitraged the system and you've created these things that are scarce and everything just kind of shot to the moon from there. And I don't know that the SEC realizes that the bearer instrument component is as prominent in the space as it is. Now, for me, it's great that they did this because it's going to bring more liquidity into the space, which is really like part and parcel with what everybody wants. Okay, I don't care. You want to be an anarchist and you want to fuck the man, fine. You also want liquidity. I don't care what you say. I know that. And you know that too if you think about it. So you can like spare me that rhetoric. And so it's good. Like, and like we have some people in the Briar Patch here. Here, showed that enough. There we go. Briar Patch, new show. We had enough people in the Briar Patch over the last like 48 hours. I don't know why. It's been like trending. It pops up in little waves that are like protesting, I think the like corporatization of Bitcoin. And you know what? I just don't have a problem with that now, because like there are many products out there to choose from. And for me, it's very, I mean, I've said this on the show before, like you pick the silo of risk that you want. And it seems as if we are going to have a degree of like regulatory compliance blockchain, might as well just create the most liquid asset in the space, put it right in the purview of, the US government, and like get that liquidity in there, get more money in there, get that thing flowing, reduce the friction, make that market deeper, price discovery more efficient, on and on and on. And like, okay, fine. Bitcoin sold out. But what we get with that is a couple of things. First off, we get indemnity for the Bitcoin developers, which I think is great, because they've always operated under the pretense of like subterfuge and like, the sort of like Gavin went to the CIA at one point and like had to like explain to them what the hell he was doing. And so that risk is really not something that they should have to bear. Like you've probably never considered what it's like to be a dev in Bitcoin. And there's stress for many reasons. One of which is that a jackbooted status would come in through your front door at the middle of the night, shoot your dog, scare your kids, and take you away. And if it's regulated, we don't have to do that anymore. Awesome. Okay, good. So that's a problem solved. Then if you want to be anti-state, like we now have the fiat leak. Remember that? The fiat leak? So like the fiat's been leaking into the Bitcoin like pool of liquidity. And then from there, what happens. What happens in Bitcoin stays in Bitcoin. And if it goes into one of these other risk profiles, awesome. So you still get to live your, anarchist fantasy. You can put it in whatever fucking product you want. Like this notion of like carrying the banner that is Bitcoin to the very bitter end doesn't have to be your story. You can continue your story with others of like mind in a different banner. Like that Bitcoin banner has been de-risked. And the problem with so many movements is that like you never have ability to end it at a sensible place. This is what the problem was with feminism, by the way, which is why I own that flag now. This is a different discussion. So like the Bitcoin rally movement identity thing is at a point where you can continue the cause in the direction you started, or you can drop it and start anew. And I think it's time to start anew. It's not that you lose faith in Bitcoin. It's frankly that Bitcoin buttresses the rest of the space. Awesome. I'm dragging on that. It's mostly because it's been such a freaking issue in the Briar Patch in the last 48 hours. And I was like, come on, guys. I think this is what's sensible. Like, there's a degree of faith around like the honey badger. It's very interesting to me because America has faith in Libertas and the God of like the Judeo-Christian God. Bitcoin is very tribal and it has faith in the honey badger. Like, I don't think that there's a greater God in Bitcoin. If anyone has a suggestion, let me know. It might be that the Bitcoin God is Libertas. I've thought of this, but it's not brandished under those terms. So I think that we are of the beaver when we are Bitcoiners. Like, it is very tribal, and that's okay. But there are other gods to choose from, and there are other faiths, and there are other communities, and there are really good ones out there right now. Really fucking good ones. What else we got? Going through the comments here. Who is worse, a multi-coiner or a no-coiner? I don't know, but whichever of those is worse is definitely who I want to be. The labels, Gabriel, man, freaking people have not figured out how labels work. It's so amazing to me because, like, I'm a guy who's really just a nobody for all intents and purposes. We know that. I know that. It's obvious. Yet, you know, I've kind of like risen in some degree of popularity by like espousing like the antithesis of the label I was assigned. So like people still assign labels, and all you're doing is handing out power. Like power, here, power. It's so funny. I think it's great. You guys keep on doing it. I don't care. But like, you got to consider that like that person has authority now to represent that group. That's what you do. That's like an out group, and the process of reclamation can begin. So Gabriel, you can assess the label of which is worse, but what you're doing is empowering those groups. What else we got? Can I upload memes? You can always upload memes. You guys are quiet today. That's not so fun. Let's talk about Florida things. Talk about the SEC. You know, I haven't really, I don't know anything about this. She has a Paul Sports name. Panic. Let's see what this person's name is. I like that they picked a woman. I think that's wonderful. It was exactly what we needed. Bitcoin demanded more women, and like Bitcoin delivered. Bitcoin is like the genie that like grants your wishes, but always with like the opportunity, like laden with the opportunity cost that you didn't know you were asking for, like the evil genie. So like when you enter the space, like your soul is assessed by like the honey badger, the greed is identified, and then like it's productized. So like libertarians wanted gold, we gotcha. You know, like the progressives wanted like securities without regulation, we gotcha. And then the 2017, the class of 2017 wanted women, we gotcha. And like Bitcoin constantly does that to people. I suspect what's going to happen with this lady is that she was given an impossible task, and you know, she's effectively the czar of bearer instruments, digital bearer instruments. She's going to be great. Which is kind of like what like Ben Lawsky kind of got. Like Ben Lawsky designed like the New York regulations, and he got like that. He got like, we had the like celebration of the man in the suit who's going to like do the regulations, and he went into like the conferences, and like we have an adult, and we all look at him. It's very like cargo cultish, or it's like, you know, it's like the sacred cow. Like we have somebody who's going to provide regulatory clarity, and then he like made these onerous regulations that nobody liked. They took, like everyone cleared the state of New York as a result, only for Ben Lawsky to then work in the industry himself. It was hilarious. I suspect that's what Valerie, that's it, Valerie, she's a normal first name. Valerie Skopanic. She's like, they gotta put, you know, they really gotta put like the phonetic breakdown for us. Because how the, like they're just they're landmines. They're asking you to be rude. Like, I don't want to be rude, but like, what are you giving me? I can't, what can I do with this? I'm not Alex Trebek. Just put like the phonetic, put in parentheses for us. She's not the blockchain czar. She is the associate director in division of corporate finance. Oh, wait, no. That was her old title. Now she is the associate director of the division of corporation finance and senior advisor for digital assets and innovation for division. I don't fucking know. I have no idea. Jesus Christ. These titles, man. What do you got here? Yeah, I think what's going on is that the SEC, you know, the role of the market when it's working well, I guess, is to like assess, like I think it does assess the virtue of men. Like I think that's what happens. So like in like what the 70s, like Tronics was virtuous, and so I guess what happened, like everyone had like Audiotronics and like Lasertronics, and like people put Tronics in the name, and like that would like rise the stock in popularity. And I guess the function of that is so that capitalist societies can figure out what people want to buy at some level, and it needs to be managed. Like you can't just let it go unbridled, because people, you know, create perpetual motion machines. But I guess what happens is that that's a guide for the market to produce things for people. And I think that like millennials haven't really been doing it. And frankly, like the robo investing is probably in part to blame, I'm guessing. I don't know. But I think with blockchain, we are getting millennials back into the investing game. We can assess, we can run these polls, these decentralized polls on what people want, I'm guessing. And it also is bringing like skin into the game, bringing capital into the markets for investment, for building American companies and so on and so forth. So I think that that's probably what they see as like a good thing here, which is very reasonable. But the other suspicion I have is like maybe there's the sentiment that there's too much regulation that is locking out capital in early stage investments. So like all of these like, pre-IPO investments that are happening that are like excluding the public is probably not in the best interest of America, because like one of the nicest parts about America is that we have like these public-private partnerships. Like all libertarians come and they're like, oh, the banks are evil. They make too much money. And the easy answer, of course, is, well, then just invest in the banks. That's what I do. I am an evil bankster. I have invested in many banks, and you can too. That's what America does well, is it provides access to these things to people. It's an amazing system. It really, really is. But when we have these Ubers, Airbnbs, any number of companies these days that aren't listing because of the regulatory overhead, I wonder if this blockchain like route either becomes a mechanism to allow the ordinary American public to invest in early stage investments, thus democratizing the gains of these investments, and or if it becomes a political football wherein like we can start to scale back some of the Frank Dodd provisions that are preventing stages from IPOing sooner due to all the regulatory crap they have to deal with. I don't know if that's a conspiracy theory. It very well might be, but it just seems reasonable to me. What do we got here? What about monkey paws? Ethereum will never fail. What's up, Mr. Feel? You never late, Mr. Feel. Yeah. I was heading off to the gym today before I came here, and one of my neighbors needed a ride to the bus station. I was like, okay, fine. So I picked the guy up. I brought him to the bus station. He was telling me he works at a pizza restaurant, and we were talking about it. And the Florida section of the show, he was telling me that they have like these maps for this pizza restaurant where their territory is, but like there's some neighborhoods they don't want to go in because this is Florida, and like problems happen in those. And I was like, well, what kind of problems happened in that neighborhood? And apparently, the last problem that the last final straw for him when he was managing this pizza restaurant, they went to deliver pizza in the complex. Some guy did that worked for him, one of his employees, and he left the car downstairs. He delivers the pizza. He comes back, car's gone. So the car was stolen on this pizza driver, very Florida. And apparently the guy who stole the car didn't remove the topper on the car, little piece on top of the car that like says the name of the restaurant, of the pizza place. And what the thief didn't know is that topper had a GPS signal in there and a GPS device, and that the branch office could see where the car was going. So the branch office calls up 911 and reports it. And sure enough, like they tell the cops exactly where the car is. The guy's driving around a stolen car with the topper on, and the police arrest him. And I found that hilarious. And then I was like, well, why are you working at a pizza place, dude? Like you're a pretty smart guy, and like nothing wrong with working at a pizza place, but like if you're gonna stay in the restaurant industry, why don't you maybe work at like get a little paid a little bit more someplace else. And he told me that he couldn't do it because he has priors. He's been arrested and he has convictions. I was like, oh, well, what's your conviction? Lo and behold, Grand Theft Auto. So we came full circle in the conversation, which I found hilarious. So then I had to ask him, well, what the hell did happen? What did you do? You stole a car. And so apparently what happened when he was younger is he needed drugs. He had enough money for the drugs, but he didn't have enough money to get to the drug dealer. So he was at the gas station. Some guy left the engine running, went inside to the gas station. So he decided to get into the car. He just drove it away, and he got away with it. He went to the drug dealer's house. He got some drugs. He ended up meeting some girl, had a great night. He woke up the next day. He dropped the car off, ran out of gas. Actually, I think he just pulled over and just started walking. That was the end of that adventure. Cops ran the fingerprints on him and got him. But I was, it's not really like it's Grand Theft Auto. I mean, like you so rarely, it's like grand borrowing auto. Like, yeah, you're a grand borrowing auto, I think, in every functional sense. Because nobody ever seems to get away with it. That's what Florida man does. He grand borrows auto. It's all about framing. It sounds terrible. Like for me, Grand Theft Auto is like, oh man, it's a crime syndicate. It's horrible. You're a thief. You have a scarlet letter. You're a blight to society. But Grand Borrowing Auto is just something you do when you're a kid because you need a car, you don't have one. Which frankly, I think that's what a decentralized Uber would look like, frankly. It would be like, okay, somebody left their car at the gas station, hop on in, make some money. Just go around town, giving people rides. And then when the gas runs out, you drop it off, and that's that. It's decentralized, and you did it. So that's the kind of decentralization we specialize here in Florida. We know these things. I'm telling you, we're the right people for the job. You can learn a thing or two from Floridians. We figured this stuff out. All right, well, you guys are no fun today. No more conversations in there. Yeesh, guys. I tell you, I'm going to go do some stuff. I got plenty of things to do. I'm going to work on, let's see what the rain is like. I got to work on this new house a little bit. What else we got this week? I think this is the last interview of the week. Next week, I've got interviews. Yeah, I got somebody who's going to talk about regulations on Monday. And then I think I have one or two interviews after that. Oh, I got jury duty on Monday. I was avoiding it. They wrote me in. Man. Not looking forward to jury duty. I'm not proud that I'm not looking forward to jury duty. Like I'm very proud to be an American. And then like, you know, when I actually get called into like jury duty, I'm like, I guess I have to do this. I'm not like proud to do jury duty. It's like taxes, you know, like you have to pay your taxes. You don't have to like paying your taxes, but you get to be proud to be an American once you've done it. So I guess this is what I get. I don't freaking know. We'll see if anything interesting happens. Maybe it'll be again, full circle. Somebody borrowed a car. And I'll be called in that case. Oh, this is the best part. So then, I asked my buddy how the court case went. He's the guy that runs the pizza restaurant. He goes in court, and I asked him. I asked him, like, what the hell did you do in court? He didn't have any money. The public defendant. So he said that he knew the guy, and that the guy let him use the car. So then the opposing attorney said to him, "Well, he's a friend of yours. Why don't you point him out?" And he couldn't point him out. And then the opposing counsel said, okay, so this is the guy whose car you borrowed that you can't point him out. And he was busted, and that was that. He was caught. It's great defense. I like it. That's the thing. If you can point to the guy in court, you borrowed it. If you can't point to the guy in court, that's what theft is. I think that's the delineation of that crime. I'm not sure. All right. That's it for today. Peace out, party people. Thanks for tuning in. See you Monday.